Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning. You have a great spirit in this room, and I'm sure great work and thoughts will happen today. I want to welcome you to the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg Center. And I also want to wish you a happy vernal equinox. Today is the vernal equinox. And in the spirit of full transparency, there is no correlation between the vernal equinox and standing eggs on their head. The two don't relate to one another. So anyway, with that aside, I know there's very serious work that's going to happen today, very serious discussions. I am Veronica Donahue, the Associate Dean for the Advanced Academic Programs. My correct title, is Associate Dean for Graduate and Professional Programs in the Krieger School of Arts and Sciences. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to the Sunshine Fest on the 20th anniversary of Sunshine Week. We are gathered here today in a space that once housed the museum, and I'm sure many of you have visited the museum when in its heyday. That was a museum dedicated to free expression and journalism. Today, this building, the Hopkins Bloomberg Center, serves as a forum where the press, academia, organizations, government agencies can come together to advance the cause of transparency. Today's sessions will include cross-discipline deliberations with a focus on issues important to open government. Events like these are part of JHU's and the Sunshine Fest's commitment to advancing civic engagement and research-driven solutions to societal challenges. But most importantly, I hope that you will enjoy your time here with us today at Hopkins with the Sunshine Fest, and thank you all for coming. Have a great, great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Donahue, and thanks for the hospitality of Johns Hopkins. This is a great building, and Shelley Kimball from Johns Hopkins for being a partner and putting this on. Really appreciate it. It's outstanding. And also, some thanks and acknowledgments. I think I need to acknowledge my boss, Hub Brown, Dean of the College of Journalism and Communications at the University of Florida, where we have our Brechner Freedom of Information project. It's been around 48 years, doing research and education and access to government information. And that's why we really wanted to make sure we could have a gathering like this. It matters more than ever, this time period that we are in now. I also want to thank the Knight Foundation, SMARSH, OPEXUS, ASAP, the Coalition for Sensible Public Records Access, all sponsors and helping out, the DC Open Government Coalition, MUCROC, National Freedom of Information Coalition, and all our great staff who worked hard to put this on. Diana Mitsu-Klaas, Sydney Sims, Abby Rio, Chris Vachon, Tara Puckey, Kate Helster, Kathleen Miner, and Jillian Hensley. Thanks. Let's do a round of applause for these folks. Thank you. And I want to thank all of you for being here. Thanks so much. And for those of you who came to the reception last night, did you have fun? Yeah? It was good. It was fun. And it was exciting. I could feel the energy in the room, as well as here today. We have 32 people, 32 states represented from all over the country, Washington, California, Kansas, Maine, Colorado, everywhere, DC, Puerto Rico. We have folks from Halifax, Brazil, Ghana, all around the world to talk about the issues of access to information. We have 27 academics here, 55 people from civil society, 13 commercial outfits, the commercial sector, 44 from government, including state, local, and federal, a lot of federal folks here, 25 journalists, types, 7 lawyers, 30 state FOI coalitions, 18 represented all across the country. I'm not sure if there's ever, that I know of, been an in-person gathering across geographies, across sectors, to come and talk about the big problems in freedom of information right now. And we have a lot, right? For requesters, we're going to hear them talking about delays and exemptions and fees and ghosting and all sorts of issues today, right? We're going to hear from government folks. We're worried about lack of funding, about their jobs being cut, about bureaucratic sludge getting in the way of them doing their jobs, as well as technological issues. We have a lot of things to talk through today, and we're going to start with this panel this morning that'll give a big picture overview. We'll go to breakouts. This one will be streamed and recorded, as well as the last session and the lunch session, inspiring stories to be told at lunch, and lots of times to network. So during the breaks, you can go to the fourth floor link, refreshments. There's sun chips and sun-kissed soda, all right? That was Frank Lamonti's idea. Frank's right there. Good job, Frank. We have a share table for FOI stuff and all that good stuff. So make sure to visit that and network, get to know each other, because it all starts here, folks. There are times in our history when we have increased secrecy. World War II, Cold War, Watergate, we have the Iraq War, and there's always pushback. And there's always people who rally around and say, hey, people are in charge of this country, and we need to hold government accountable, and we need to invest energy, time, and money in ensuring the people's right to know. Well, I think we're at another time in that history right now. I think we all know that. It's all everybody's talking about. And clearly, there's increased secrecy right now at the federal government in the U.S., and it's trickling down, the states, local. We have the data. We see the anecdotes. We know what's going on. And so we know it's more important than ever that we talk about these problems, and more important, the solutions. So the last session, we're going to really focus on recapping where do we take it from here. And we're not going to end today. We're going to go on. We're going to talk about this virtually through the year. Maybe come back next year if you think this was a good idea. And we're going to try to build momentum and energy for the people's right to know, because everybody can buy into that. No matter what party you're in, whoever you support, we all support government transparency. So that's what we're going to do today, right? Yes. All right. So with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator for our first panel, Alasdair Roberts. He's professor of public administration at University of Massachusetts Amherst. He's author of Blacked Out, Government Secrecy in the Information Age, a great classic book, and tons of awards that he's won. Alasdair, we're glad to have you. His full bio is on the website. Feel free to check out all the bios of our speakers there. And we have an esteemed panel that he will be able to get going here. So thank you, Alasdair, and everybody for participating. And thank you for being here.
Great. Well, thank you, David. Thank you, all of you, for choosing to spend your vernal equinox here. I know it doesn't happen very often, so we appreciate the commitment. And welcome to Sunshine Fest 2025. As David mentioned, I'm a professor of public policy at University of Massachusetts Amherst. I should also say I'm a citizen of Canada, which, as our national anthem says, is the true north, strong and free. So it was a British writer, actually, James Bryce, who said 140 years ago, "Sunlight kills those noxious germs hatched where politicians congregate. To expose injustice is to defeat it." And so that's the sort of theme for the session and the week, Sunshine Week. What brings us together today is this shared interest in the challenges of bringing sunshine to government. And the first panel we've got for you today is really intended to set the scene, to look at the state of play so far as open government is concerned, both within the United States and internationally. And we've got a fantastic panel here to set the stage for us. The full bios are on the website, so I'm not going to go into them in detail. I'll just give you the sort of top line for each person. We've got Megan Rhyne here, who has worked for the Virginia Coalition for Open Government for the last 27 years and has been the executive director of the coalition for the last 17 years, and who also serves as the administrator for the National Freedom of Information Coalition and the Knight Litigation Fund. We've got Daniel Schuman, welcome Daniel, who's the executive director of the American Governance Institute, a nonprofit organization based in Arlington that focuses on strengthening democratic government in many ways, improving government accountability, reforming Congress, and improving government ethics, among other things. We've got Bob Gellman, who many of you will know, who's a privacy and information policy consultant here in Washington, who spent 17 years as a legislative staffer working on freedom of information and other information policy matters. And Toby Mendel, to my left, who's the founder and executive director of the Center for Law and Democracy, which is a Canadian-based international human rights NGO which provides expertise on freedom of information and other questions. And before that, Toby worked as a senior director for Article 19 in London, another international human rights NGO that focuses on freedom of expression. And it occurred to me as I was reading Toby's bio that if you're looking for a short list of words that were likely to cause trouble at the border these days, Canadian-based international human rights NGO seems like a pretty good start. So I think what I'll do is perhaps I'll just go down the line here. So what I'm going to do, just in terms of structure, is ask each person to speak just very briefly for no more than 5 minutes. And then I'll just give folks on the panel 1 or 2 minutes for rapid response if they want. And then I want to open it up because I know we've got lots of expertise and interest in the room, so we want to preserve as much time for conversation as we can. So Toby, why don't I just throw it over to you?
Okay, great. Thanks, Alasdair. I have to say I had no problems at all at the border yesterday. Might possibly have been facilitated by the fact that there was almost nobody going through that border. I can't say for sure. So I'm going to say a few words about sort of what's happening around the world on this issue. The world's a big place, so I'm going to be very selective in my comments. But I'd like to start by mourning the death of an important friend in the struggle, the global struggle to promote the right to information, as I prefer to call it. Actually, that death is being fully realized today. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about when I talk about a death being fully realized, I am, of course, not talking about an individual, but the Mexican Independent Oversight Body, or INAI, which is being terminated literally today after a very long struggle. Many of you may have worked with INAI. I know that many of you have, and it is, in my opinion, one of the most important national, regional, and international support actors in the field of the right to information. It was a very, very powerful, very important body, and it was killed off by the current and immediate previous governments of Mexico as part of a much wider attack on democracy and democratic institutions, but certainly RTI was very much in their sights as they prosecuted that attack. India is another country where we have seen fairly serious attacks by the government on the oversight body again. The attacks there were not quite so devastating as in Mexico. They didn't bring about the demise of the independent oversight system, but they were serious enough that my local contacts there have assured me that where the government really wanted to win a case, they could do that. Now that attack in India has pulled back a little bit because Modi, who had a huge majority and was hoping to get an even larger majority, kind of got slapped down a little bit and is reduced to minority. But I think that one of the key common factors in both of these cases is that these attacks on the RTI system are being undertaken by populist governments. And we have another panel later today that's looking at the issue of the relationship between populism and RTI, and I will certainly be very interested in that discussion. I can say that in my own experience, those sorts of governments are often fairly toxic for the right to information. I do, however, also want to stress that there are quite a few positive things going on around the world. It is not a uniform picture of unmitigated disaster. I was, for example, chatting with a colleague of mine who's on the Right to Information Commission of Sri Lanka, a country which has one of the strongest legal frameworks for RTI in the world. And their decisions, their binding decisions, have been subject to 25 challenges in the courts, and they have won 24 of those 25 challenges. So I think, I mean, that's just a statistic, but it shows that, they're, and I think overall the scenario in Sri Lanka has been one of successfully prizing open, a wide range of public authorities who were used to operating very much in secret. So, I mean, over the 9 years of that law, I would say a huge amount of openness success. We're also starting to see we're also continuing rather to see progress in terms of adoption of RTI laws. There are 140 laws around the world. Last year was a kind of a slim year. No new laws were adopted in 2024, but there is continued optimism on the horizon. My organization did an analysis of the 56 UN members which don't have laws. Of those, 30 are extremely weak democracies, according to democracy assessments. So, kind of countries that we don't necessarily expect to rush forward in this issue. 17 are countries with less than 1 million inhabitants. So challenges for them in putting in place these laws. And then there's 9 other outliers. I've been working quite closely with UNESCO in the Small Island Developing States, SIDS, and we have, as part of that work, we have put together a package of proposals as to how these little tiny bureaucracies can successfully manage to implement RTI systems. And I'm pleased to announce that just yesterday or the day before, the time difference to Fiji is so large it's hard to track that, but they have tabled a very strong package of legislation on this issue in the Fijian legislature, and we have commitments from a number of other SIDS. Malaysia, one of the 9 outliers, it doesn't fit into the kind of 2 groups, also has promised access to information. So there's continued progress on that area, in that area. As advocates, and I'm absolutely in this space myself, I always see the glass as half full. And that's because I want to put more water in that glass, and looking at the bit that's full doesn't help you with that. That's perfectly legitimate and that's perfectly proper. But I think if we stand back, we're going to have a slightly more balanced view around the half full, half empty. And I would say that there's a whole block of states that aren't wildly successful, aren't falling apart, that are basically rolling along in a fairly steady, fairly half full, half empty kind of way. David today restricted his comments about not good progress to the United States, but I think yesterday you were sort of making a slightly wider claim about backsliding on this issue, wider geographically. And I can't speak to the U.S., or I won't speak to the U.S. because you all know more about it than I do. But I would say that globally I would beg to differ with that assessment. I don't think we are making enormous progress, but I don't think we're backsliding either. So, I think we're sort of on an even keel. Of course, my evidence for this is anecdotal rather than based on a methodological study. I think it would be very difficult to do a study like that. I will say in my defense that I have quite a lot of anecdotal experience, work a lot in a lot of different countries, but I certainly look forward to any disagreements and different points of view from the audience on that perspective. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Toby. Megan.
Thank you. So every time I'm asked to say, oh, well, what's going on in the States, I like to think of past summits with NFOIC where I would get together with my counterparts in other states. And it was like we were the old people sitting on the porch of an old folks' home, because we were all like going, well, my state's the worst. And no, my state's the worst. No, like you're talking about your bunions or something. And but it's true. It's sort of, whatever situation you're in, it's going to be the worst because you're constantly dealing with new exemptions being introduced, and just an overall climate, just it's always bad. But then it's hard to compare nonetheless, because everyone has these unique laws. They have unique political situations, divided legislatures, captured legislatures, what have you. A lot of reactionary laws get passed, based on some news event that has happened recently. So it really is kind of hard to compare. or to say what is everyone experiencing. But I tried to think of a couple of areas, and one of the things has been alluded to several times is the overall political climate. And I don't just mean now. It's been going on for at least 10 years or so. It's that everyone is so focused at the federal level that it's really hard to get the attention of a lot of people in the public, and even legislators at the state and local level, even though that's where the rubber is meeting the road in terms of real citizen and journalist access to records and to meetings. If I were to think, though, of specific challenges, I have 3 that I think we all share in the records space, and they're interrelated, and that is fees. The cost of obtaining fees is bad in every state. Every state has a different way that they assess fees, but there's no one perfect statute, because no matter what statute is in there, whatever the setup is, it will be manipulated, it will be misinterpreted, and it is used as a deterrent frequently to make people go away. By the same token, the second problem that I see that we all share is that we're drowning in electronic records, especially email, because we use email for everything. Person is right next door, but you're in there emailing back and forth. You copy everybody, we attach things, we quote the previous message, and then we re-quote the previous message. And so you have maybe 3 unique comments, but you got 3 pages worth of repeated stuff. And all of those records have to be reviewed when they're requested. So that's going on all over the state. So that ratchets up the cost, of course, because it takes longer to do and longer to go through. And then, because these requests are becoming so complex or generating so many records, you have the easy characterization of requesters as being vexatious. And there's a breakout section about this where you can get into this more in depth. But there's a growing trend that I've seen across the country of assuming that if your request generates a lot of records, then you are by definition vexatious. Or if you do a follow-up of your request, if you do too many follow-ups, you're considered vexatious or a nuisance. And there are those bad actors out there, of course, but that's certainly something that people are trying to fight against. So those 3 interrelated things, I think, every state is dealing with. In the meeting space, I think what we're all seeing is people very concerned about what's going on and their ability to speak at public meetings. And even though that's not usually written into most open meetings laws, it is nonetheless something that my counterparts in other states, they get questions on, because they're like, can they do this? I went to the meeting, they told me I could only speak for however long, or they wouldn't let me talk about this, what have you. So we're all fielding a lot of questions about public comment. We're also fielding a lot of questions, I think, about public access to meetings through electronic means. COVID told us that we could do this. We figured out how to do it, and we figured out how to do it pretty cheaply. And then COVID ended, and then suddenly they all kind of forgot how to do it. And they said, but they wanted more room for themselves to be able to meet electronically as a board, but they're not ready to give that same grace to the public. And so I think there's legislation in a lot of states to do that, but whether there's legislation or not, there's a lot of people out there who are calling us saying, I live 100 miles away and I want to go see this state agent. I want to know what the state agency is doing, and they won't give me electronic access. So, and then enforcement and appeals, but my time's up, so I'm going up, Daniel.
Thanks.
I put my timer on.
You may.
Very well.
Daniel.
Well, first of all, thank you as a Virginian, thank you for. So I have an enviable task to talk about the federal government in the United States. But I'll start on the positive side, which is that government openness and transparency is traditionally a nonpartisan issue. I went and looked at Sunshine Week hearings in the U.S. Congress over the last 20 years. And you had witness testimony from Senators Grassley, Leahy, Cornyn, journalists like Terry Anderson, from folks like the New York Times, Judicial Watch, National Security Archive, Heritage Foundation, ACLU, POGO, and on, right? This is the different sectors of our society have routinely testified before Congress in favor of open, transparent government. Since 2020, however, there has been only one Sunshine Week hearing in Congress. From 2010 to 2019, there were 9, and between 2000 and 2009, there were 6. And of course, Sunshine Week started in 2005. So the level of congressional bipartisan interest is a challenge. We haven't seen any good FOIA bills emerging in quite a while. Looking at the executive branch side, which I apologize, but this will be fun. The good news is, according to a press statement dated February 23rd, 2025 from the White House, we do have the most transparent administration in history. That was also tweeted, by the way, back in 2018, where it also was the most transparent administration in history. So I guess it's more transparent or something. There is a good recent law that was enacted 5 years ago during the Trump administration, the Open Government Data Act, which on January 15th, 2025, we finally got the implementation language from it. It only took 5 years, just in time for the administration to change. And that law is focused on open by default and making data inventories available. So there's a 180-day clock ticking on that for the agencies to start engaging and creating collaboration with the public around releasing data sets. So we'll see how that goes. We did, of course, just have the firing of the head of the Office of Information Policy at the Department of Justice. We know that public records officers are being fired across the government. We know a lot of them in OPM and likely elsewhere as a consequence of the more or less 20% reduction in force that the administration is illegally trying to undertake. We had the firing of the Archivist of the United States and her deputy, and the new continuing resolution that was just enacted had a $9.5 million cut to the National Archives just because. There also is, of course, the removal of government websites and data from data.gov. We do have the new JFK records that were made available in the last day or two. There does appear to be some new information in there, as well as the Social Security numbers for everybody who served on the Church Committee. So that was great. We are watching litigation about whether the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, which is not a department, I guess it is of the government, and whether it's efficient, I guess we will determine. Requesting security clearances for Musk went in, and the response to the FOIA request on that was good luck with that. So I'm glad a FOIA officer has a sense of humor. The federal court did say that DOGE, of course, is likely subject to FOIA, so we'll see how that works out. I was recently canned from the Open Government Federal Advisory Committee as chair, along with all the other members of the Open Government Federal Advisory Committee. So that will potentially create some difficulties for the U.S. creating a national action plan, which is due by the end of this year. The good news is that the FOIA Advisory Committee still exists, and let's hope that it continues to exist. There are some other glimmers of good news elsewhere. The Congressional Transparency Caucus inside Congress continues to be active, with Representative Quigley continuing to lead, and I think he will be here later today. I discovered that the U.S. Capitol Police has announced a FOIA-like process. They announced it secretly in 2024, so I discovered it last week. But it is something that I'd spent 3 years advocating for, so I'm really glad to see that they're doing it. Good job, guys. We now have Congressional Research Service reports not only publicly available, that was a 2018 law, but they're now available by API and as structured data. The enactment of some laws, like the Access to Congressionally Mandated Reports Act in 2022, resulted in a new portal at the end of 2023, and this should have all agency reports to Congress being made available in a central location, which is great. And they are working hard towards that, although agency compliance is not great. With my colleague Alex Howard, who is in the audience, a number of civil society organizations released a letter, or are releasing a letter today, calling on the Open Government Partnership to put the U.S. under review for actions contrary to the principles and policies of the Open Government Partnership. So perhaps we will see some international action with respect to evaluating how the U.S. is engaging. I should say, just sort of as a note, For a while, we saw a decrease in coordination in the federal level and inside in the U.S. government working for open government. But we see that trend reversing, where organizations had started sort of going on their own track. We're seeing them starting to come back together. There's a FOIA subcommittee for the Open Government Roundtable, which is a civil society collaboration, and we saw a 30% increase in organizations that are involved in the roundtable. I think we all realize that we are in the fight of our lifetimes, and I'm heartened to see all of us here, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Daniel. Bob.
Thank you. I'm a fossil. My local library branch is the Southeast Library, and the Friends of the Southeast Library, of which I am a member, the acronym is FOSSIL. I'm a fossil in another way. I was the House staffer for Freedom of Information from 1977 to 1994. That was 30 years ago. From my perception, the Freedom of Information Act was originally and remained nonpartisan for a long time until Ronald Reagan came along. And I want to tell the story of Ronald Reagan and the Freedom of Information Act very quickly. When Reagan came in, the Senate turned Republican for the first time in 30 years. And the Reagan Justice Department actively and aggressively pursued amendments to the Freedom of Information Act that would have effectively repealed it. It would have left it in place, but it would have been useless. The battle here largely took place in the Senate. I was a House guy. And Orrin Hatch was the chairman of the subcommittee with jurisdiction in this area. I could tell a lot of stories about this, but I've only got 5 minutes, so I only get an outline. The Republicans didn't really know how to run the Senate very well. The senator who protected the Freedom of Information Act for many years was Senator Leahy, and he's a great hero of the Freedom of Information Act. And he was the principal opponent of Orrin Hatch in the subcommittee, in the Senate Judiciary Committee. He and his staffer, a guy named John Podesta, a name that some of you will recognize, John Podesta later worked in the Clinton White House. He worked on Hillary Clinton's campaign. He founded the Center for American Progress. And he ran rings around the Republicans while this battle was going on. I can't talk about the details, but it was just wonderful to watch this from over on the House side. And I told an academic who was writing a book, which unfortunately never got written, that the chapter about the 1986 amendments should be titled, John Podesta Saves the Freedom of Information Act. On the House side, we just played defense. We did nothing as long as we could. When the Justice Department, we finally held a hearing and the Justice Department said we're not ready, we just gladly accommodated their request for a delay. Couldn't have been happier about it. We did have our own bill on a small matter involving the Freedom of Information Act that was a cover for doing nothing. And we passed our bill in the House, and going back and looking at this, I just discovered that our bill was misreferred in the Senate in 1986, which is a curiosity to no one but me. But be that as it may, in the Senate, the Republicans finally figured out how to do things, and in 1986, they put the Freedom of Information Act amendments that they had in a Christmas tree bill, which many of you will recognize as a bill at the end of a session that contains all kinds of disparate legislation that all get shoved together and passed in a lump. This bill bounced back and forth between House and Senate, and we had some opportunity to make changes to it. We shaved off a few rough edges, and we finally, in the end, agreed to pass it. This was the 1986 Freedom of Information Act amendments, which weren't great, but they were better than they had been, largely because of Senator Leahy's efforts, and a little bit was ours. And the bill that we had worked on, that was a small FOIA amendment having to do with business procedures, I could have added on to the bill at the end, and I killed my own bill. It's one of the things I'm most proud of because it just wasn't necessary, although most of what we had in there happened anyway in a different way. So the lesson here, this was a very bad period for the Freedom of Information Act. The Reagan administration was not happy about it, and the administrative side of it was worse than what went on in the Congress. And the lesson is this too will pass. Eventually, we had Democratic presidents who showed more interest in rehabilitating the Freedom of Information Act. I'm not sure their efforts made that much of a difference, but at least they said the right things. And Republicans came in again and said the wrong things. And the people who implement the Freedom of Information Act, for the most part, are fine Freedom of Information Act officers who did their job and tried to implement the law, notwithstanding the usual political interference that happens with people who come into government and don't understand the idea of openness. The requester community, for its part, also has a lot of reasonable people who use the law well, and there are plenty of people who use the law poorly, who abuse the law and complain unreasonably, and a lot of the problems with the law come about as people react to one another. When you're unreasonable, I'm going to be unreasonable back, and that creates a lot of problems. So that's a really short history of a very, very bad patch for the Freedom of Information Act. We all survived. It wasn't great, and I hope the same thing will happen again because the whole pattern is repeating in a different way, but it's not good.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bob. So I think what I'm going to do, just for the sake of time to get some questions in, is just go immediately to questions. And am I right that there's a mic floating around for questions? Or will it just shout them out?
Yeah, we can do some questions. I can't fill Donahue this whole room, but
All right.
I'll
Well, tell you what.
repeat the question if you can't hear it.
If anyone's got a question, just to raise your hand. There's only 2 rules. If your question seems frivolous or vexatious, we'll probably ignore it. If your question is very long and burdensome, there might be a slight charge for answering it. But would anyone like to sort of kick off? Got a question they'd like to ask? Yes, right here.
All right, I'll give this a try. Thank you, Frank.
Freedom of information includes the mandatory declassification review provisions of the executive order on classification 13526, which was not changed during the first Trump administration. Do you foresee a revised EO on declassification in the second Trump administration? And are you looking out for changes that would impede the release of information to the public?
Would anyone like to take a run at that?
I can only answer it partially. So this is not my area of expertise. I think that the biggest constraints that we're going to run into are going to be financial, where the ISOO is not going to have sufficient staff to do any work to be able to do this type of thing inside a hostile archives. We have seen the Trump administration has some interest in declassification of some things, but whether that lines up with what requesters are interested in and how that mandatory declassification process works, I don't have enough insight to be able to answer your question. So I'm sorry.
All right. Anybody else want to pick up on that? No? Okay. Any other questions?
Got a question way up here.
Okay.
Hey, good morning, y'all. I'm a reporter from down in Georgia. I just want to ask, on the international, national, or state level, what is the best open record policy you've seen? What should our states and localities be implementing?
Right. I think we can probably go right across the board on this. So Toby, would you want to do you want to start on this?
Sure. So one of the things my organization does is we have a fairly sophisticated methodology for assessing the strength of the legal environment for RTI. So we look at not only the primary legislation, but the constitutional framework and administrative law and whatever affects the business. And we have rated all 140 national laws in the world. So, obviously there's national laws and then there's a lot more subnational laws, and we haven't done all the subnational laws. I'm always a little bit embarrassed these days to mention this, but the top-ranking law in the world today is Afghanistan. And I mean, yes, go ahead. You know, but I mean, before the Taliban took over Afghanistan, and if I got a kind of reaction like that, I would push back hard, because advocates, openness and democracy advocates in Afghanistan fought hard to get that law. Their government passed that law. Yes, the country had a lot of challenges in implementing it, like it didn't control half of the country, but they were actually moving forward admirably given their context with that, and the fact that they did it is real. Of course, now it's a little bit embarrassing because the Taliban completely ignore it. They have no rule of law. For example, it has a robustly independent oversight body, which they've just brought inside the Ministry of Information without having changed the law. The RTI rating only looks at the law, so the second country is Mexico, which is about to fall down from that second position. But you can look at the RTI rating. I think Serbia's third, Sri Lanka's fourth. I mean, you know, and if there's any particular issue that you're interested in, it has 61 separate indicators which look at every detailed issue that should be reflected in a strong law. So, for example, you talked about timelines or fees or whatever. I mean, if you want to look at the thing, you can go and look at it by indicator, and it will rank all of the countries alphabetically by full scores and then to the part scores and whatever. And you can see also the exact provisions. So, as a research tool, it's really pretty powerful. So, I'll stop with that.
All right, thank you. Anyone else want to chip in on that? Yes, Bob.
Well, I don't want to, I think Toby's ratings are lovely, but I want to make a slightly different point. The nature of the law, the rules, the problem with freedom of information in particular is you can't legislate good management of a law. And most of the problems with, at least at the federal level, with the Freedom of Information Act are really management problems. And if you look at the federal law, it's gotten more and more convoluted over the years as Congress has tried to stop this or that, and that's not the solution. I don't know that there is a solution specifically, certainly not as a matter of law, but the management problem is true everywhere.
And I would echo that for the states. The analogy I always make is a play. You can have a script, and it's the same words on the page, but you give it to 10 different directors and who have 10 different pots of money and talent and places where they put on their presentations. You're going to get 10 different productions. And so the words on the page, and it depends on the culture of compliance that you have. And so that's why every time there's a new governor in Virginia, and if you know Virginia, because we always have to do things stupidly different, you can only have, the governor can only have one term. But I write a letter to the governor every time saying, you know, culture of compliance, it trickles down. Please tell your state agencies to do, you know, be more open, and they always ignore it. So, you know, but.
Daniel, did you want to throw in a word here?
Yeah, I would just maybe make an inverse point, which is that I'm a big fan of proactive disclosure requirements, that it's a good way of narrowing the questions around, like, should I give this to you or not? No. All the reports to Congress, you need to make available. You need to make transcripts of all the proceedings. You need, like, things that are very clear and that you must do this and that have a remedy that's attached to it. I tend to be big fans of those types of laws because it eliminates a lot of the discretionary questions. And I'm a legislative branch person. Like, that's where I focus on. And I think that the U.S. Congress is pretty transparent about a lot of its operations in a way that you wouldn't see in the executive branch and you don't see with the federal courts. So I actually tend to look at legislatures and the way they make information available, and that there seems to be a pressure to make more and more aspects of what they're doing publicly available. And that is something that is more sticky in the way that you don't necessarily see it across administrations.
Thank you.
Great. We got 2 questions up here, and then I see some hands over here. We'll snag these. I wanted to add, we have a great session on enforcement today. It's going to be amazing with Margaret Cuoca, who spent a year studying the Mexican Commission, which just disappeared today. And by the way, we invited the commissioner, and she was going to come and speak. And she said she couldn't. She was boxing up her desk. So, not to mention a lot of the FOIA custodian officers from the federal government and others who were going to be on panels or moderators or speakers who had to back out. So if you notice, the panels are a little heavy with the requester community. There's a reason for that. Folks were not allowed to speak, so that's unfortunate. All right, so Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, hi. Until about 3 weeks ago, I worked in a federal agency FOIA office, so I guess I'll start by hearing all of the management concerns that all of you just had across the board. But I have a concern that I think that was sort of alluded to a second ago, which is that you can have the best law in the world if you don't have the proper implementation for it. And I think that the big crisis that we're about to run into, when it comes to the federal FOIA at least, is that all of the FOIA officers are gone or leaving, and the courts, I'm not sure, have yet figured out what it is they're going to do about that when it comes to shaping relief for access to public records. So I know that over the last couple of years, there has been litigation in which certain individual judges across the country have ordered sweeping hundreds of thousands, millions of pages a month of production from particular agencies, the FDA litigation in the Northern District of Texas specifically, which led to all of the judges in DC essentially having to put stays on all of their production orders for everything affecting the FDA because all hands were on deck for the one order. Similarly, there's ongoing litigation against USAID, which now no longer has any FOIA staff whatsoever, but are still subject to ongoing judicially mandated production orders. And I think that there is going to be, at least initially, some willingness by judges to sort of say, well, you have to produce this stuff anyway. But when it comes to the open defiance of judicial orders in far more serious contexts that we're already seeing for the administration, I'm just curious how it is that you're anticipating, I guess possibly even from international examples you might be familiar with, or examples at the state level, if there is any precedent for how it is that a civil society can react to a simple lack of administrative capacity to comply with the law.
Thank you. Anyone want to pick up on this?
Well, maybe just to talk, United States is a rule of law country, or that's how we understand it. There are, of course, internationally lots of countries which aren't, and we talked about Afghanistan just a minute ago. I think, what civil society can do, and I don't think this is advice for the U.S. in its current predicament because, it's a very unique situation, but, civil society can embarrass, can expose, can, use traditional advocacy techniques really to push back on this. And I think last night David also gave some inspiring words about how crises are also places where the genesis of resistance comes forward, and let's hope that's right and that starts to happen in the U.S.
Bob.
I just want to make a small point. I think everybody knows this, that we're in a wholly unprecedented situation in a lot of respects with government functions, and we have no idea how it's all going to turn out. And there's great risk, not just to individual programs or individual agencies, but to the structure of the federal government as we know it.
Daniel.
Yeah, so FOIA and access to information is a small part of the broader accountability mechanisms that make the U.S. government work. Those mechanisms exist within the inspectors general, of which 18 were fired. They exist within the Office of Special Counsel that protects whistleblowers, whose head was fired. It exists inside the United States Congress, which just voted on Friday to undermine its capabilities to hold the executive branch to account by undermining its appropriations process and letting a CR bill go through. It's addressed by the federal courts, which are either unwilling or unable, although we will find out, to grapple with the magnitude of the problem. And as these systems of accountability, these checks and balances fail, and they are failing, the final recourse to any type of this is a popular movement, right? That's the, post-Watergate, which was a different system, you had changes in the electoral results where you had a huge majority come in that pushed a lot of reforms for things around impoundment. which is another fight that we're having again now. And I suspect that we are in a worse situation now than we were in then. And the moment that we're in is where there is an effort by those who are in charge to have one set of facts, one voice. And you cannot have dissenting information. You can't have facts that make alternate points. We see it with the attacks on universities. You see it with what likely will be attacks on nonprofit organizations. This is where we are going. And it is not a surprise that freedom of information is one aspect of this attack.
Well, we're almost at time, but let me just ask, we've talked a lot about sort of what I'll call supply side considerations. How well are laws administered? Is the staffing there to honor the requirements of the law? Let me ask about sort of a demand side question. We've talked about the requester community or civil society organizations. How would we assess the health of the requester community or civil society capacity to hold governments accountable for applying these laws? I'm thinking about the state of journalism in the country, in the United States today and elsewhere. I'm wondering about the capacity or resources of civil society organizations. Should we be worrying about that as well?
I'll go ahead and speak up because I would like to just point out that my original point about federal sucking the life out of the state issues, and I don't mean to say that you all suck the life out of anything, but that's what everyone wants to talk about. So, there's this overarching, people want to talk about what's going on in Congress and the executive branch, and trying to talk about the states is kind of hard to break through. I think this shows it. But as far, my organization, I think a lot of the state open government coalitions were formed for in large part to remind legislators that FOIA is not a journalism law. It may have been championed by a lot of journalists in the early 70s, but FOIA is for everybody. And so that is what we at VCOG do all the time. I'm not a journalist. I'm an attorney, and so I approach it that way. And I think the requester community, if you can call a state a community, is very robust. Citizens want to know things about their community, and they sometimes get kind of pushed to the side because they're not doing public interest. They're doing fishing expeditions. Well, fishing expeditions are really just attempts to find out information about things that are happening in your community that directly or indirectly impact you. So I think in that regard, we've done a very good job of reminding the legislators that it is a law for everyone, and I think the citizen community in Virginia, at least, and I would imagine in all the states, is very, very active and robust.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to pick up on that point? Daniel.
Sure. So just picking up on that, like transparency and accountability is something that has widespread support no matter what your political valence is. Like this is something that everybody uses rhetorically, and many people, but not everyone who use it rhetorically, actually believe in it. I wrote an article, I think at the end of last year or the beginning of this year in the Bulwark, which talked about the defunding at the federal level for civil society organizations that do this work. And we can look around at the organizations that no longer exist. I used to work at the Sunlight Foundation, which no longer exists. OMB Watch no longer exists. OpenTheGovernment.org, then just Open the Government, no longer exists. Our friends at Open Secrets just had a third of their staff let go. So the interest from the funder community to support the advocacy work that makes these things work has dissipated to a significant extent. And we're now seeing a lot of the foundations and wealthy individuals who would otherwise support this work are afraid to stick up their heads. They're like, oh, we're going to spend some time sort of engaging in reflective thought or whatever, so that those of us who do the work have a real struggle scraping enough pennies together to continue to do the work. So maybe there will be a change in that perspective, or maybe there will be continued intimidation of these entities that support the work, and it will become even harder to do this work.
And Toby, if I could just put you on the spot quickly, what's the health check on civil society capacity internationally?
Yeah, I mean, that's really country by country, to be honest. I mean, the withdrawal of U.S. support for foreign aid has struck a deep blow. The U.S. was probably funding about a third of the global work in this area, and that's for anyone who's run an organization, you lose a third of your money, and that so that's kind of a crazy thing. So I mean, we don't know, and I mean, I think I think we need to look a little bit at the wider information ecosphere, and I mean, I know that's a huge discussion and topic, but obviously you asked about journalism. I mean, the health of journalism globally, including in this country, has collapsed as revenues have been drawn off by the platforms. That is, and there are those talking about information as a public good. So we need highways, we need healthcare, we need education, we need to fund this publicly. We should fund this publicly too. That's an interesting dialogue, but it's not, the rubber's not hitting the road on that. I think we are suffering from misinformation, disinformation, but also a lot of other challenges to our information space, which are, the term currently being used more as information integrity. So you can have a perfectly accurate story that's not got anything wrong in it, but that completely distorts the narrative. For example, in Canada these days, it's getting a lot of media play, like leading media play, about a Canadian businesswoman who crossed the border here from Mexico. She applied for a work visa. She didn't have her papers all in order, apparently, and then she was, put in chains and thrown into a cell and didn't, freezing cell without any blanket and wasn't fed properly and whatever. And then finally, after 5 or 6 or 7 days of that kind of abuse, she managed to escape to Canada. Now, I don't doubt that any part of that story is inaccurate, but the impression it gives, especially in this current sensitive climate, let's put it like that, is utterly distortive. So, I mean, I think that, our information space and FOIA, or RTI, is supposed to at least slightly reinforce the information space. And, there are a lot of international statements by leading freedom of expression and right to information activists about that. And I think that it's a tsunami of information degradation that RTI can never, even if it's strong and healthy, can never actually hold back. So I think that the challenges are deep.
All right, thank you. Well, first, just before we wrap, Megan, you shouldn't feel badly for saying that I might have sucked the life out of a conversation. I've got 30 years of course evaluations that say pretty much the same thing. Would you all please join me before I turn it over to David? Just join me in thanking our panel for a wonderful scene-setting conversation.
Thank you, and Alasdair, thank you as well for coordinating this. This was great, and I'm sorry we ran out of time for more questions, but today we really hope to make these sessions interactive because there's so many experts sitting right here. It's so silly in a way to have panels. I mean, really, this is a group discussion because we have a lot to talk about. And I do have to say, I did reach out to the White House and Doge to invite them to come and speak, and I got no response other than now I get an email every day from the White House saying how great things are going. So I'm now on their mailing list. So, but they did not respond. So, which is unfortunate because I do think we need to hear all voices, and I think we're going to hear a lot of voices today. So, we start up at 20 after, so you have 15 minutes. We have 3 breakout rooms. Feel free to visit the link on the 4th floor, get some coffee, get some sun chips, get some sun-kissed soda, whatever you want, and have a great day today. We're gonna have fun. Thank you.
For all these years, working in Amherst County.